Kia ora koutou. My name's Asha Anderson. I'd like to welcome you to another meaningful conversation today with my very good friend Barbara Belger and our friend Keri Molloy. Today we are going to have a meaningful conversation about censorship. So welcome to you both. Really nice to see you, and really nice to meet you for the first time, Keri. I'm really interested in what you have to say and have really been enjoying your very brave writing that you have been sharing with us around some really important issues. So maybe before we get started, would you just share a little bit about yourself so that we know who you are?
Sure. I've lived in Kerikeri for 30-something years and have worked as a journalist, initially as a reporter for the Northern News, and then as editor of the Chronicle and the Northern News, the Bay Chronicle and the Northern News. I quit my job in 2014 as a direct result of censorship from the corporate body.
Hey.
So it was a very painful process. And I researched the readership, but the direction I had was, quote, non-negotiable. And so there came a point when I decided, well, my daughters actually told me, you don't need this, Mum. And I drafted a letter of resignation and pressed the button. And that was the best thing that I could have done. So, yeah, so that was a long time ago, 2014. And now censorship is glaring at us all constantly in very many different forms, very subtly and very obviously. So it's something that I feel very passionate about and very sad about concerning mainstream media.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, thank you. I wasn't aware of that was the reason that you left. So this makes this conversation even more important. So nice to see you too, Barbara.
Yes, thank you, and kia ora both and everybody. Really lovely to be with you ladies here. I'm very excited about our talk and our conversation. And I was just thinking, Keri, actually just this moment of how we met. I'm not sure whether you remember, but we met because I was planting gardens all over Kerikeri with the Kerikeri project, and both papers contacted me to write about it, and I discussed that with the group, and for 2 years or so we said, no, we don't want to do this because we know what newspapers are reporting and what they're not saying, and we just didn't want it. So it was censorship, fear of censorship then. Yeah. And then you and I met, and I tried to put this message across, and the article was actually really nice. So thank you. Yeah.
Yes, now I do remember. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get stuck into it. I mean, I think it's probably good first off just to talk about what censorship is. What kind of forms does it take? Because there's many different types of censorship. So, and when we can think of the media and all kinds of media and the refusal to publish certain voices and opinions. We can think of politics, where certain groups and certain ideas may be purposefully maligned. We can think of the way that certain groups are attacked when their views are expressed. In this modern social media world, we have cancel culture, which is another form of censorship, where there's a lot of peer pressure that basically shuts people down from saying from expressing themselves, because their views might not be mainstream or might not fit with other people's views. So what kinds of censorship have you experienced, Keri?
Well, what led me to resign was I was told that I was covering too much Maori politics and too much conservation and too many stories about fisheries. And I was told to stop. And that was keeping in mind that that was at a time, at a very pivotal time for Ngāpuhi here, because they were, having the Waitangi tribunal hearings, and the settlement process was starting to gear up, and there was disagreement within the iwi. So there was a heap going on, and as our readership in the far north is, our population is predominantly Māori, I thought it was my job to report what was going on. But the bosses down in Auckland wanted, quote, light and fluffy. Yeah. And yeah, so it was a really sad process, because the Bray Chronicle had kind of been my baby, and I'd always had a really good relationship with readers. The network was very solid, but I could explain all of this about the demographics and the fact that people didn't get their news from the Herald or from TV, that the local paper was where they really got their local news. And the ruling was, quote, non-negotiable. And I had emails sent to me written in red, strangely enough, for reason, so. And I would, answer the phone and hear my superior's voice on the phone, and my stomach would go into a knot. But I couldn't just lie down and take it. It just isn't in my nature to adhere to stupid rules. And so I quit.
Yeah. Good on you for standing your ground. I mean, our local papers have been such an important way for people to get that local news, because it's a lot of the stuff that's very, very relevant to us that doesn't make it to the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And so that's that direct connection there. And I'm afraid to say, myself and probably many others don't bother reading the local paper anymore because of a complete lack of substance. So it's yes, it's a real shame.
What about you, Asha? You mentioned in another talk about you lived in China. So did I, and maybe I quickly jump in and just talk about my experience. It's not so much censorship, but maybe it is censorship. It's more control and surveillance. And that was a long time ago, and I really didn't like at all how my emails were intercepted. I lived in Shanghai, and back then email was one form of conversation with the world, with my family at home, and the other one was telephone. All the other technologies hadn't yet been on the market. And so literally I was on the telephone with someone, and there were certain words I could just not write in my emails. And I knew that then the email would be intercepted and delivered not at all or much later. And that's just not a good feel. There's nothing to hide. People always say there's nothing to hide. And I've got that conversation as well with people. And when they tell me, well, I have nothing to hide, I don't mind that surveillance and all that. And I said, so do you close your letter when you send it, or do you leave it open? And most people still actually close their letter. But yes, it's censorship is really end of democracy, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, free speech is one of the foundations of a sound democracy, isn't it? Fulfilling our right to be able to have freedom of expression and to express our ideas and our views. Yeah, when I was a young woman, I went and lived in China for a year and was an English teacher. And I worked at a private primary school, and I had the privilege of living in the residence of the principal, the former residence, which was on the school grounds. And the school provided me with a computer so that I could stay in touch with my family and friends. And straight away, the internet in China is heavily censored. You just can't access you know, it's as if websites don't exist. That was less of an issue because I suppose to a certain degree you don't know what you're missing when you can't find it. But I did have several experiences. One of them, I was actually there working when 9/11 happened. And so I got to experience the Chinese reaction to 9/11, you know, which was very much, the Chinese feel very persecuted by the West and by America in particular, and have, I suppose it's an ongoing grudge. And so they were quite happy that America had got its comeuppance, really. So I was on the phone. Well, no, I was on my computer speaking with a friend here in New Zealand about this and about what I was seeing in terms of the Chinese Communist Party and the way that people are funneled into becoming members of the party. And if you're not a member of the party, you miss out on all kinds of opportunities, you know, whether it's employment opportunities, whether it's opportunities to travel abroad, to succeed in your profession, you must become a member of the party. Anyway, so I was having these conversations with my friend and sharing with him about what I was seeing and what I was experiencing. And the following day, after school, I went back home to the residence that I was living in, and I went online to use my computer, and it wasn't working, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. So I had to get the computer teacher, a really lovely man, to come and to suss out what was going on with my computer. And so he worked on it for a bit, and he later told me, he said that the soundboard had been removed. So, so someone had come into the apartment and removed the soundboard from my computer. Wow. And it was you know, and this happened the day after I was having these conversations that were, you know, perhaps not speaking very highly of the Chinese Communist Party. And, you know, so that was my first real experience with censorship in China. I did have another experience which was related to Falun Gong. So you might know Falun Dafa, Falun Gong practitioners. So Falun Gong material, written material, any kind of Falun Gong material is completely banned in China. Now, I was traveling at the time, and I was on a 30-hour bus ride. So these buses had beds in them. And so I was on this, it was in the middle of the night, and we must have been halfway to our destination, and the bus got pulled over, and these police, some kind of special task force, came on to the bus and started searching everybody's belongings. And I didn't really know what was going on or what it was for. And they told me they were looking for Falun Gong books. So they were searching people's, you know, I remember this one guy had this huge sack, like a cubic meter of tea, and these police were like sticking utensils into this tea to try to see if there were any books or anything in there. And so that was my first experience of Falun Gong, because I'd never heard of it before that. And I had spoken to, after this happened, I spoke to one of my Chinese friends, and she said the narrative that the Chinese government, the government puts out is that many young students, young people get converted to Falun Gong, and they become brainwashed, and they commit suicide by self-immolation, by setting themselves on fire in front of you know, public buildings and what have you. And so there's this whole narrative around Falun Gong, you know, propaganda to, you know, to discourage anybody from becoming involved with it. And so, but it was only once I left New Zealand and I actually saw the Falun Gong practitioners and connected with them and actually learnt what they really stand for. And it's completely the opposite for you know, so there's very heavy censorship around around that, and even Christianity as well in China. And then, I mean, then there's the whole Tibet and the Uyghurs. So it was something that I really learned a lot from those experiences. Yeah.
That really is what probably censorship, or the sad thing about censorship is that we are not hearing the full information. And now, of course, the whole propaganda drive is that it's called misinformation. And then, I mean, even in Jacinda's speech, the opening or the inauguration, whatever you call it, at Harvard, she talked about, being very thorough about not allowing mis or disinformation. And it's unbelievable. This is should be, a place of learning and a place of science, and an idol, or, assuming some mentorship in the study world. And open discussion is now called misinformation, disinformation. And we have one single source of truth only. But yes, Keri, what is your take on it all?
Well, I'm just, as you're speaking, I'm just thinking of a talk that I heard by a highly qualified British doctor who, look, I can't remember his name, but he's very highly thought of in the medical field. And he concluded that science has been corrupted. That we're not, even when we are presented with so-called science, we're not getting the full story. And it was illustrated today. I was listening to a podcast. I don't think you were recording when I mentioned this, Asha, so I'll say it again. But it was a talk on, I think he calls himself Dr. McBean anyway. He was interviewing two people who had been participants in a study carried out by the NIH on vaccine injury. And so good news, vaccine injury is being recognized and a paper has been written about it. But the bad news is that in this preprint, the conclusion was that all of the patients who had suffered vaccine injury had all recovered after a certain period of time. When in fact, the interviews with the two participants showed that neither of them had recovered. So the discussion and the conclusion of this paper was erroneous. So it'll be really interesting to see when the paper goes for peer review, whether the people doing the peer review pick this up or not. And this leads to the awful thing about censorship is that it erodes trust, and it has eroded trust so badly that nobody can fully trust so-called science anymore.
That's right.
You
have dogmatic
your own research. You just have to dig and dig and dig and do your own research. And you look at the numbers of highly qualified medical people who have either lost their jobs or lost their licenses or are not allowed to make podcasts or whatever. And they're highly qualified. And they've been issuing warnings about these vaccines from day one. And what was all considered conspiracy theory, and we've got to get rid of this misinformation and disinformation, is actually evidently true.
Yeah.
So the censorship, I mean, there are two, I would raise, there are two really interesting things about censorship. And one is to stop the hate expression. And certainly there must be a place for that. You can't have people expressing hate for minority groups or threatening violence or, what I'm trying to say.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And how do you how do you deal with that and reduce that hate speech without interrupting free expression and without eroding, as you say, the cornerstone of democracy? And that's a huge question.
That is the question I was going to ask you both, actually. Yes, absolutely. It's
I heard something. I was listening to a podcast about that, and I'm trying to think of who it was. It was a priest, or I've got to find it. If I find it, we can put it in the link later, Asha, under the YouTube description. But what this person was saying, a man, he said the best is to approach these people, because we've got to think of, why do people have so much hate? I mean, I'm coming from a psychology or therapist kind of view. If someone feels, especially on social media is a cesspool of hate, and quite often, where does this come from? Why do people feel a lack of power, that their way of expressing power is anonymously? Keyboard warrior is such a big term. What could we as society do to include them more and really hear and understand where this comes from? Nobody, in my view, no baby is born filled to the brim with hate. It's just an unnatural occurrence. And again, in my trauma-informed work, very closely related to early childhood adverse experiences, or call it trauma, or whatever. And that really is a fundamental issue that we need to address, to release it and just say no. So a friend of mine in Germany, she actually joined a group, and I'm not 100% clear about them, but all they do really is they gather, and it's nearly also a kind of censorship, I think. But they when they when they find piece of hate speech, they engage in conversations with these people. They link in and they help each other, and it's a huge network. And they actually got some kind of award from the German government for doing that, to intercept especially cultural and racial hate, but it does help to have meaningful conversations with these people, if possible, to really all censor it and cancel them and deplatform them. I'm not sure whether that's the way to go. I simply really am not sure whether that would be a way to go. I hope not. I hope there is another way. But it's clearly not okay. It's clearly not okay to sit on your keyboard and just dump on people in the cruelest way. That's never okay.
Looking at the reason, maybe, Jacinda Ardern gives the perfect example of how a person who was loved and adored suddenly, after her actions or non-actions, is despised and hated, and how she's attracting awful hate stuff on her Facebook page. And I think it could have been so easily avoided, if she had gone down to the protesters and said, I'm here to talk to you. I will listen to what you have to say. Even if she had said, we can't stop the mandates as you want for this, and this reason, but we're going to look at it again in 6 months' time. If she had said, I'm so sorry that some of you have been vaccine injured or lost loved ones, we will look after you. There were ways that she could have increased the adoration, but she didn't.
Why do you think that was?
And who was censoring her? You know, that's the question. Why did she take that route? Where did the kindness go? What pressures was she under that led her to censor like that?
Yeah, I was reading one of your earlier blogs on Substack, Keri, February 24th, actually. And your final sentence is a quote by Hannah Arendt, which she is mentioned quite often now in Matthias Desmet's work on mass formation. The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. And I think the title of that was The Unasked Question. And it was precisely on where did it change? Where did the kindness go? There may have, I think maybe something did happen. I think the political agenda simply was turned, and it was more towards the outside. And you mentioned the agreements that Singapore and Chile made with the World Economic Forum to be the test ground for all sorts of like even social credit system, and that became more important than looking after the team of 5 million. I think that was just, you know, the view on a possible job in the UN. I know she's now talking to the NATO in Spain at a meeting, and that suddenly became much more important. Why is probably another question we should answer. But yes, it would have set a fantastic example worldwide if she stood and went down to Freedom Village and talked to people. It would have been historical. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to make a comment on when is censorship appropriate, back to that question. So when it incites violence, I think censorship could be considered, it is appropriate. And then, of course, to do with the sexual exploitation of young people and, you know, of people in general. So I think those two stand out for me as being things that require us to take that extraordinary step and censor and use censorship as a tool in order to reduce harm. But forgoing that, I think that freedom of speech and our right to express ourselves trumps everything. And that should be sacred and protected at all times. And I think it was really interesting listening to you both. You know, I think that absolutely, Barbara, you know, that those difficult conversations of things that perhaps we might want to not hear, but still are legitimately being expressed, that we are able to investigate those, that we're able to have those deep conversations, that we're able to understand where that's coming from. Often it's coming from a place of trauma itself. And so those things have no chance of evolving if they're shut down and swept under the carpet. In fact, the opposite might happen. It creates a climate where they can fester and become even more toxic. So it's by bringing things out into the light and having that robust debate and protecting our right to debate and talk and discuss, you know, that we can actually start to truly deal with some of perhaps the darker things that we wouldn't like to see in our society or wouldn't like to hear about. And even just dealing with people's intergenerational trauma, you know, that plants the seeds of some of this, you know, some of the hate speech, some of these kinds of feelings. And I think many of us who perhaps have a heightened awareness to this, and even others, we watched Jacinda Ardern create the conditions for hate and for division. And that is something that politics and the media does. They create the conditions for division and hatred to actually thrive, and they pit people against each other. And this is another thing that I experienced. And I think coming back to New Zealand, thinking that we must have an independent media and we must, surely we're above all of this, we're a democracy and we're in the free world. But actually the New Zealand media and the New Zealand government like to target people, groups of people, and they like to paint them with a brush of being an anti this or an anti that. And in doing so, they're very purposefully attacking the reputations of those people and saying to the rest of New Zealand, these people aren't worth listening to. Their voice doesn't matter. So, and that's something that I've experienced through my advocacy work around raising awareness around the use of toxic chemicals and poisons in this country. And you can see the way that they paint anti-1080 people, these in fact are organic people. These in fact are people that are for wildlife. These in fact are people that are for a pristine, beautiful, environment free of any toxins. That's actually what they are. But you can get a picture of a scraggly looking hunter, and call him an anti-vaxxer and then throw in a Trump flag. This is the kind of thing they do. So their motivation is to discredit people and have them being ignored. Another experience that I had that I'll share with you briefly, and this is, I have to say that censorship, this style of censorship through the media and the government, pervades society, and it becomes a peer pressure thing because it's psychological brainwashing when you're getting this messaging all the time. So in 2019, our Flora and Fauna of Aotearoa held our very first sustainable conservation conference in Auckland. Now, we selected a beautiful heritage venue in Titirangi, and we invited a whole range of speakers, and we had a wonderful conference. But before we actually began, we turned up on the day, and I was chatting with the venue manager, and she actually let me know. She said to me that the forest and bird people had come around and tried to pressure her into pulling our booking for the venue because they don't agree with non-toxic conservation, because they support 1080. So this is the way that people try to censor others just because they don't agree, rather than have a true conversation, rather than have a true debate, rather than accept a diversity of opinions. They're trying to go around and stamp out other people's opinions. And it's just ridiculous. So that was another experience that I had. But I definitely think, we all need to be advocates of free speech, advocates of a diversity of views, even if we don't like them. I can't remember who said it, but I like the quote that, I will defend your right to speak to the death, even if it's not, not something that I believe in, because in doing so, I am protecting my own free speech. And that's something that we have to really understand, because as soon as you start shutting other people down, you're creating a situation where your own voice will be shut down at some point.
Yeah. That quote, I'm not sure, Socrates, one of the people who, I think maybe Galileo, one of the people who said that the earth is not the center of the universe, but the sun is, and he had to drink the poisonous drink. And he said, it will cost my life. I will never repent, and the truth will always be the truth. And that is some. I was taking notes, and what you said also, Keri. The problem with censorship is two things that I'd like to touch on, if that's okay. One involves media and also science, and that is the direct relation to where the money comes from. And the other one goes into conflict resolution. And for me, censorship is is interrupting a conflict. And because it's not resolved, like you just said, Asha, because then it's not resolved and maybe try to be suppressed, it will just fester, it will just continue. And that is what you also said, Keri, with Jacinda not showing up at the protest or the protection village, I call it Freedom Village. Things just carry on now. They just fester, and they and then more dramatic measures will have to be implemented to for all this festering stuff to be more suppressed. So it's like in a one-on-one conflict resolution. You know, when you mediate between a conflict, it has to always come to a win-win, and not to I'm stronger, I'm louder, I've got more money, and therefore you have to be quiet. And I just think if this video has any message, I would just like to appeal to people's intelligence and remember that they have an intelligence, a curiosity, and they have an obligation to question things and be curious, and not just blindly believe whatever is out there, just whoever writes the most shocking, dramatic headline in the paper. That's just, you know, just do question things. I think I mentioned Dr. Malone before, Robert Malone, as one of the guys involved as a scientist in the mRNA technology back then. And I subscribed to his emails, and he's a lovely writer and quite witty and funny, actually. And he's been kicked off Twitter and LinkedIn because he questioned things. And I mean, who else other than people like him? And he's getting threats, you know. And he said, what was his headline? Let me just see. Rogue agencies and the COVID truth seekers. And he just said it is so obvious, you know, that he has secret agencies and CIA and whoever actually on his case and surveying him and censoring him. Trump was kicked off Twitter. I mean, whether somebody likes Trump or not, but to kick the president or ex-president of a social media platform, and then, I mean, our world is just crazy. And then Elon Musk buying the whole shop and then saying, well, I don't care about that, so Trump is back in. I mean, how crazy is our world, and how money directed is our world also. Sorry, I'm keeping quiet now. I got heated.
Well, you know, the one thing I would like to say about censorship is that I think, and I believe, that it comes from weakness. If you have something worthwhile to say, there's no, you would not be motivated to censor anything. If you have nothing to hide, you would not be looking to censor anything. You know, if you have to censor people to get your point across or to get a belief across, it's from a position of weakness.
Mm.
I totally agree. It is, if I think of, you know, my life coaching and things, people have, by the age of 8, I think, they have their main 5 strategies to deal with situations. And I can't remember all the details. But one, of course, that is very much so for girls, is crying. And one is the silent treatment. And I think censorship is a little bit silent. It's a silent treatment, you know. I'm not going to address this now. I censor and walk away. And then, and again, like we said, it's not going to resolve the conflict, nor will it help me if I act like that. And yeah. But where to draw the line, Asha? And you're right, you know, the violence and sexual exploitation. I mean, there are situations where, yeah, I don't know. do we employ better protocols or group
one of those
rules?
things. We have to find a balance, and it's something that we're continually going to be having to do. So it's that finding that balance between transparency and ethics, you know, and rights. And so I think it will always be a balancing act, but there can definitely be some guiding principles and some weight, you know, substantial weight needs to be given to our basic rights. You know, I just want to read, so in our Bill of Rights, number 14 in the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990, it says number 14, freedom of expression. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression, including the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and opinions of any kind in any form. And we need to be elevating, you know, these principles that should underpin all of our legislation, all of government decisions. And I think that's the guidance that we need, that we're missing, because right now they ride roughshod over it, really. And I also think we need to be acknowledging the actual scope of censorship at the moment really is one massive corralling of consciousness. When you look at all of these little individual instances, it's easy to reduce them down to specific, you know, issues. But when now, you know, given these last 2 years and with the COVID pandemic, and we see the actual level of censorship and how it's increasing, and all of the different things, all of the different narratives it's trying to control. It's about control. It's about controlling what you think. It's not just about, oh, you know, hate speech or some of these real issues. It's about actually controlling what you think, and also, I think, hiding information. It's about hiding the truth, and that's what's wanting to come out now, is the truth around these vaccine injuries, the truth around all the propaganda and the millions of dollars that they've spent on convincing us, you know, the millions of dollars they've spent trying to keep the media on side. You know, there's all of this truth that needs to come out and be understood. And that, I think, they're holding it's like a dam wall.
Yeah.
And it's right what you say, Keri. It's right. It comes from a place of weakness, and maybe the increase in, you know, in all this. Desmet says that, the Matthias Desmet guy, who writes about mass formation, and the increase in totalitarian measures over, let's say, the last 100, 200 years. It's just gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. And maybe, like you say, Asha, maybe that is a sign that the truth is so close to the surface now that they just have to try harder and harder and harder to suppress it all. So maybe it's a good sign after all. And at the moment, it's just terribly painful still.
Yeah. And there's all these people that, you know, this one woman who was interviewed today, a participant in that study, she has been ill for 18 months, and nobody, you know, she was a doctor herself.
Yeah.
Know how to deal with it. She went to countless doctors. She tried countless remedies, and the authorities just brush it off and don't give her any acknowledgement or any help. And there would be thousands of people in that situation globally. And there may be in the minority. Most people were probably fine with the vaccine. But how can we abandon these people?
Yeah.
You know?
When the Counterspin, I think our new media is quite interesting around the world. And of course, here in New Zealand, we have Liz Gunn and her group. And we have Chantelle Baker. I think she's doing quite a nice job. and then Counterspin Media, whether we like the people or not, but they're doing a great media job, journalist work. And they've been on a tour around New Zealand in some places, because I lived there or I've got friends there, were interesting. And I just looked at some of the replays, and like you mentioned before, Asha, some of the places they had booked a venue and then were kicked out last minute of the venue because it was just not politically correct to host them. How pathetic. And but at the beginning of each presentation, and I would say they probably visited maybe 50 cities, towns around New Zealand, maybe more. And on average, I'd say they had between 50 and 200 people in the venue. And they always asked, so do we know anyone who died from COVID? No hands. Literally every time there's no hands. Do we know anyone with vaccine injuries? And all the hands went up.
Mm.
And that is a truth that will just always prevail. The truth will always come out at some point around the world. And it is, and I mean, there's been so many. One of the real good first project that was made was in Israel, because they don't have a reporting system like VAERS or the yellow card in England, and here we have CARM, which is a bit of a joke. But in Israel, a lady took it upon herself actually to interview people with vaccine injuries and then make a movie from it. And that is the human spirit, and it just can never be suppressed. I just really want to believe in that. And I mean, look at also all the media platforms. You know, YouTube canceled them all, except like Joe Rogan, you know, with 10, 15 million subscribers. That was too expensive to let that go. But YouTube canceled. And then we have all these other alternative platforms, Getter and Odyssey, and the same with blogging or writing. You know, I mean, a lot of the blogs you can't write on anymore. I'm not sure whether I could write what I'm saying on Medium. No, I haven't tried. But that's where people then are on Substack. And Substack then has a paid version and people make money from it even. So yoo-hoo, you know, so it's not possible. It's just not possible. The truth will always come out. You cannot censor it.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what we're doing now, is creating those new mechanisms, creating those new avenues, because people have tried for so long to get these old institutions to evolve and to actually, you know, to actually start doing a good job and to call out the corruption. But when it's rotten to the core, you know, you have to create something new. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about a lot of what's going on. It's so corrupt and it's so rotten, and it was made that way from the beginning, that we don't need that anymore. We don't need that anymore. It needs to crumble. We need to be censoring the media by turning our TVs off, by throwing our TVs out. Stop listening to shitty radio. Stop, you know, just stop consuming a lot of this stuff and actually just start listening to people who are telling the truth, and allow these new organizations to build themselves up and actually start with a clean slate, you know, with some morals and ethics, and with, you know, in alignment with how we want to be.
Yeah, I'd like to recommend two people who write for Substack. One is an Australian journalist called Caitlin Johnston. I don't know if you've read any of her stuff. She's an amazing writer and very brave and very outspoken and very logical. She's great. She's got a piece this morning on the abortion controversy, which is very interesting to read. And the other one is our local Guy Hatchard.
Yes.
you probably do read, and he's also extremely brave and does his research. And I've sent a couple of his pieces to even family members who are kind of on the other side of the fence, and they tend to attack the man rather than the subject, which is a great ploy. You know, it's part of the censorship thing. If somebody says something you don't like, then find the skeleton in the cupboard and disgrace him, and then nobody will believe him. So, you know, that's a well-used tactic.
Exactly the method, always a method. You question facts and technicalities, and the counter attack is always under the belt line. It's just always personal. And that is what Robert Malone was writing about, that instead of discussing on the facts, you know, and facts, you can there's always a ground to discuss on, but no, it's always a personal attack. Dig deep, look into Facebook profile, and dirty. It's just always dirty. Yeah.
All right, ladies. Is there anything you'd like to mention before we wrap up? I think it's probably a good amount of time already.
I'm thanking you, Keri, to raise this subject and bring it today as a topic. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation here.
It's been good to hear your views, both of you, and to have a conversation going. I would just like to end on saying that I have a really strong belief in people power. And that's what we have to build on.
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you both for a really, really interesting conversation. I know we could keep talking for a long time, but hopefully this will lay the foundation as well, I think, for some of those other conversations to have about totalitarianism and transhumanism and some of these other interesting topics that are becoming more and more relevant. So yeah, thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, really lovely to connect, and look forward to seeing you both again soon.
The human experience, I just want to finish with that, and thanking you also, Asha, for being so masterful with the emceeing these conversations things. With regards to possibly our next conversation regarding transhumanism and a rather mechanistic or reductionist view on what a human being actually is, and I agree, Keri. I think the human spirit is unbound. It's fantastic. I just so believe in it, and all we need to do is just get closer together and people power. But what I heard in a conversation about transhumanism was, you know, yes, you can take a Beethoven symphony and call it and say, okay, it's sound waves, and these are the technical bits, and you can replay it all. It will never be, and then you can recreate it, but it will never be a symphony. It will never be a Beethoven symphonies. Likewise, you know, here on Zoom, I can see you, I can hear you, but a hug or actually knowing you, and you know, when it comes to real, like even intimate relationships, to actually have the touch and be close to a person, it's like I can look at a waterfall on a computer screen, perfect high resolution waterfall, but I will never get wet, you know. So it's, and that I think that is what we will lead into in our next conversation.
Yes,
consciousness and all that. But thank you, ladies. It was fabulous. It was a great way to spend Tuesday.
Yeah.
Lunchtime.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Okay, bye now. Thanks. Bye.